It was a hot day in 1933. A British man, named Maurice Wilson, was gripping the stick of his small, open-cockpit biplane tightly, watching his fuel tank run dry. He had only learned to fly a plane 2 months earlier. But his biggest problem wasn't the fuel running out thousands of feet in the air. It was a long list of problems. The British officers he had left behind in Bahrain, the certainty of being arrested if he landed in Iran, the waves of the Persian Gulf below him, and the growing possibility that he wouldn't reach a safe place before the fuel ran out. Despite all this, Wilson kept going, because the mission he was on was far bigger than these small problems. His mission was to crash this very plane into the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest. Welcome back to Algem TV videos, viewers. Maurice Wilson was born on April 21, 1898, in Yorkshire, to a middle-class textile mill owner. For Maurice, if the Great War hadn't started when he was 16, he probably would have joined the family textile business. Instead, he followed in the footsteps of his older brother Victor and joined the British Army on his 18th birthday. He was eager to get to the battlefield quickly. Finally, in November 1917, Wilson was sent to France, where the Germans were attacking the British Army. By 7:00 a.m., the Germans had surrounded 3 of the 4 companies of Wilson's battalion. But Wilson, who was in the remaining D company, kept firing blindly at the Germans from a machine gun post. Wilson was very stubborn, the kind of stubbornness that could get a person killed. But he survived this war without any injury, as the last soldier in his company who wasn't wounded. For his bravery, he was awarded the Military Cross, because his actions had stopped the German attack. Just a few months after receiving this award, in June, Wilson was sent back to the front line. On July 19, 1918, Wilson was advancing with a small team when a German machine gunner spotted them and opened fire. Wilson was shot in the back and left arm, but he survived. These wounds would cause pain and weakness in his arm for the rest of his life. For the next several months, Wilson was admitted to the hospital due to his wounds. After that, he was sent to a reserve battalion. But perhaps trouble was written in his fate. As soon as he arrived, he caught the flu, which was spreading rapidly around the world at that time. This illness took him back to a hospital bed, and World War I ended while he was lying there. During his treatment, Wilson wrote a letter to the War Ministry requesting a pension for his injuries. But the ministry rejected this request because military doctors said his injuries weren't serious enough to warrant payment. Wilson was very saddened by this rejection, and it planted a seed of rebellion against the government system in his heart. This hatred stayed with him until he was demobilized in 1919. Wilson faced the same question as thousands of other World War I soldiers. We made so many sacrifices, suffered injuries, but we didn't get a good reward for it. Wilson was now broken inside and wanted to do something big with his life. He wandered around the world for the next 10 years. During this time, he had 2 marriages and changed several businesses. But by 1932, the peace he was searching for was nowhere to be found. On top of that, his war wounds were still causing him constant pain. His health was deteriorating day by day. During this time, Wilson met a guru who said that if he fasted for a few days, all his problems would be solved. Wilson indeed fasted for several weeks and spent time in prayer. After a few months, he returned to society completely healthy, having fully recovered not only from his depression but also from his illness. Now his belief became even stronger. No matter the problem in the world, it could be solved by fasting and praying. Wilson now started taking on new challenges. He claimed that with the power of his fasting, he would do something that no one had ever done before. During this time, one day he came across a newspaper article. It was about the 1924 British Mount Everest expedition. In that mission, George Mallory and Andrew Irvine had tried to reach the summit of the world's highest mountain, Mount Everest, but both had disappeared along the way. Wilson now had a purpose. He became determined to conquer Mount Everest alone, with the help of his fasting and prayers. But the problem was, how to conquer Mount Everest? Wilson knew that missions to Everest cost a lot of money, required various gear, and were funded by sponsors. Most importantly, extensive training was needed. But he was looking for a shortcut to bypass all these requirements. In 1932, the Houston expedition was making headlines. In this mission, a plane would fly over Mount Everest for the first time and take photos from there. Remember, at that time, no one had yet conquered Mount Everest, and the world was very eager to see the top of this mountain. At this point, a crazy idea was born in Wilson's mind. He thought that he would join this expedition, and when the plane was over Everest, he would parachute out and thus become the first person to reach the summit of Everest. Within a few weeks, he dismissed this idea as impossible, but only to replace it with an idea even more dangerous. Yes, Wilson had gone completely mad. He planned to buy his own plane fly to Mount Everest, and crash-land it on the snow at 15,000 feet. That way more than half the distance would be covered, and he would cover the remaining half alone with the help of fasting and prayers. It's important to understand that Maurice Wilson had neither mountaineering experience nor flying experience. He had done a little bit of practice climbing hills, but made no attempt to learn any technical mountaineering. After that, he bought a 3-year-old heavy-landing Gipsy Moth plane, which had previously been part of a flying circus. It was a wooden, 2-seater, open-cabin biplane, very popular in recreational aero clubs of that era. He had Ever-Wrest painted on the side of the plane, a made-up name that perhaps resembled Mount Everest. During his pilot training, his instructor clearly told him, "You'll never even reach India." But Wilson stuck to his stubbornness. Meanwhile, the British Air Ministry found out about his mission and didn't want Wilson to do anything crazy like this. The British Air Ministry informed Nepalese authorities of Wilson's plan, and they revoked his permission to enter Nepalese airspace. That was bad news because Wilson had planned to reach Everest via Nepal, but he was willing to go to any extreme to fulfill his stubbornness. He called the media to the Stag Lane Aerodrome airfield in London, tore up the British Air Ministry's telegram in front of everyone, and took off without caring about any permission. Everest, loaded with extra fuel drums, could travel up to 750 miles. Wilson made refueling stops in Freiburg, Germany, Marseille, France, and Pisa, Naples, and Sicily in Italy. This was a beautiful and almost trouble-free journey, but after crossing the Mediterranean, difficulties began. In Tunisia, police arrested him, but he was soon released. Additionally, in Tunis, he mistakenly filled the plane's fuel tank with water-mixed fuel. But luck was on his side. He managed to land safely in the city of Gabes, Tunisia. There, he refilled the fuel properly, and then headed for Egypt via Tripoli, Benghazi, Tobruk, and Alexandria in Libya. When he arrived in Cairo, he got bad news. The permit to fly over Iran, which he had been assured would be waiting for him in Cairo, was nowhere to be found. He spent the whole day running around to various British officers, but perhaps the British themselves had deliberately stalled his permit. Instead of wasting more time in bureaucracy, Wilson flew straight to Baghdad. Now Iran was in front of him, but he had no permission to land there. So he needed a new route. The problem was that he didn't have a good detailed map. He landed in Baghdad, bought a children's school atlas from the market, marked his route on it, and departed for Bahrain. By now, the British officers had started thinking one step ahead of Wilson. They had already sent telegrams to the next stop. When Wilson arrived in Bahrain, a British officer called him to his office. The officer told him directly that there were no airstrips ahead for his small plane, only one place in Iran, and if he landed there without permission, he would be arrested. The officer told Wilson that he could refuel his plane in Bahrain, but only on the condition that he returned directly to London. Wilson agreed to this. But when he took off, instead of turning towards London, he headed straight in the opposite direction, east towards India, passing along the southern coast of the Persian Gulf, avoiding Iran. He had secretly noticed a new strip near Iran on the British officer's map in Bahrain, Gwadar, which used to be part of India. Hours later, when the fuel gauge on his plane approached almost zero, Wilson safely landed at Gwadar airstrip. Wilson continued his journey to British India, where a new wave of press enthusiasm was waiting for him. He traveled all over India celebrating his victory, and finally reached the city of Purnia in northeast India, very close to the border of Nepal. But the long arm of the British government reached him again. Local police were waiting for him at the Purnia airstrip. They seized the Everest and posted security guards on Wilson. The British government reminded him again that despite having a plane, Wilson had no permission to fly over Nepal. Wilson was now badly trapped. Forget permission, he couldn't even fly his own plane because it had been seized. He was now stuck between the British government and his dwindling funds. Finally, in July 1933, he was forced to sell the Everest. His plan to crash-land his plane on Mount Everest was completely ruined, but he still didn't give up his stubbornness to climb Everest. He spent the winter in Darjeeling, India, fasting, praying, and trying to get a permit to enter Tibet so he could fulfill his dream by climbing Mount Everest from the Tibetan side. But every attempt failed. Finally, he began secretly planning to climb Mount Everest. On March 21, 1934, Wilson started his journey on foot, disguised as a Buddhist monk, crossed Sikkim, and reached Tibet. After a couple of attempts, he returned from Mount Everest's base camp, because he was struggling with shortness of breath and his health was deteriorating due to lack of training. On his second attempt in 1934, Wilson again set out for Everest, but this time with 2 companions. These 2 companions were experienced, so this time they reached Camp 3rd in just 3 days. Wilson left his companions at Camp 3rd and started moving forward alone. His companions tried hard to convince him not to go further, but he didn't listen to anyone. This was the same stubbornness that could get a person killed. Wilson gave his companions a final instruction. If he didn't return within 2 weeks, assume he was dead. But they waited not 2 weeks but a whole month. When Wilson didn't return to Camp 3rd, they left Everest and came down. In the last days of July, they reached India and reported Wilson's death. Finally, another English mountaineer had become a victim of Everest's terrifying world. 1 year after this incident, in 1935, Eric Shipton's Everest expedition found Wilson's body. It was lying between Mount Everest and Changsi, below a pass called the North Col, amidst his backpack, diary, and torn tent. The last entry in his diary was dated May 31, 1934, which read, "Starting again. What a beautiful day." We hope you will also like and share this AilGem TV video to the fullest. Thank you so much for your loving comments. See you in the next amazing video.